You are listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. Sustainable World Radio brings you in-depth interviews, news, and commentary about positive solutions to environmental challenges. Solutions that adhere to the permaculture ethics of earth care, people care, fair share. Are you interested in learning more about permaculture projects around the globe? How to plant a food forest? Restorative design or ethnobotany? Then stay tuned for Sustainable World Radio. I'm your host and producer, Jill Cloutier. My guest today is John Steele, an aromatic consultant, archaeologist, and author. John teaches workshops on aromatherapy and the sacred use of fragrance in contemporary and ancient cultures. John is the owner of Lifetree Aromatix, a select line of botanical essential oils and exotic floral absolutes. John Steele, welcome to the program. I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you.
And you source and work with essential oils from around the globe. Can you tell our listeners what defines a real essential oil?
Essential oils are the products of what is called secondary plant metabolism. And they are substances that the plant produces. They serve a functions for the plant itself. They're almost like the plant's endocrine system. Some people call essential oils the soul of plants in a more poetic way. They regulate plant metabolism, and specifically what they do is they attract pollinators, the moths, the butterflies, the beetles, that into their floral layer, so that when they fly to the next plant, they provide the pollinating link. And the other thing that they do is that they repel predators. So you have this attraction and repulsion dynamic. Some plants are more effective at repelling predators. I'll give you an example. There's a tree. This is a very graphic example. There's a tree, a thorn tree in South Africa that giraffes love to eat, and they eat the leaves. And when the leaves get denuded to a point where it's going to hurt the health of the tree, they put out a biochemical signal, and they increase, the essential oils cause the plant to increase its tannin product so that the leaves turn so bitter that the giraffe can't eat them anymore. And not only that, they broadcast this scent to other trees nearby that all of a sudden change their tannin their percentage. So it's kind of like a warning system. So there is what we would call in essential oils a botanical intelligence, and this is a term that the ethnobotanist Terence McKenna used, this idea of botanical intelligence, that there is an intelligence in plants.
I believe that plants have survived and thrived for millions of years.
Yes, the first aromatic plants were the conifers, and they came into being on Earth about 400 million years ago. So that is what we would call the first real aromatic revolution, is going from non-aromatic to aromatic compounds. Aromatic, once you get to an aromatic compound, it denotes an evolution and a higher level of intelligence in the plant.
Wow. So when we talk about essential oils, and it's the plant's defense and attraction, which is really interesting if you think about where some of us are wearing these oils. How do they act? How do they act on us?
Well, that's a very interesting question. The first thing that I would say to that, I just make it a little broader for a moment, that in perfumery. Plant materials are used, and there are a few animal products of which I do not offer, but I say this just out of interest. There is the castoreum and civet, and those are the two. These are animals' sexual calling cards, biochemical calling cards. Just the way that a flower puts out scent, so do animals. And we are the only animals that would put on other animals' sexual calling cards. And by using plants, we're using the sexual or the attractive nature of plants. So we're unique with that. Animals use their own scents, plants use their own scents, but we utilize other species' attractive molecules. What we do when we put on, like women in particular, when women put on things like rose or jasmine or magnolia or orange flower, we are using the attractive quality of plants. For us, we literally turn women into these floral beings of attractiveness. It's almost a transference of the vibrational substrate of what plants do, so that women become like flowers, and women attract men, just like flowers attract pollinators.
I know that scent does, and there's many studies, and we've all experienced the scent affects our moods. It affects us.
Mm-hmm.
Right now I'm surrounded. I have some ginger that's blooming in a vase that I bought at the farmer's market. I'm wearing jasmine, rose, and neroli.
Wow.
And then I have plumeria blossoms that my tree was blooming. So I feel that flowers really, not to sound too esoteric, but it touches that soulful part of at least in my case, I feel like it touches my soul and can bring me to places that I wouldn't necessarily go on my own.
Of course it does. This is why it's called the soul, the soul of the plant, and it does have a soul resonance. Let me put it to you this way, that fragrance is of the five senses. Smell, because see, we can't talk about fragrance without talking about the way we apprehend it, and that's smell. So smell is very interesting without getting too much into the physiology. Smell, we smell through these two epithelial receptor sites at the back of the nose. And in these pads, there's probably maybe 3 to 4 million receptors in each of these like epithelial pads at the back of the nose. And these are actually, those pads is actually brain tissue. It's actually an extension of it's the only part of the human brain or an extension of it that is directly exposed to the atmosphere. So when you do that, it's like when you see somebody across the room, the rods and cones of your eye imprint on the retina, and you get an image of the person. But when you get an image of the person, that image does not actually, the person doesn't enter into your body. The image of the person does. The difference is when you smell something, a person that, let's say, has perfume on, what happens is that the molecules actually enter through the nose and interact chemically, this is the key, with your receptors. Smell and taste are the only two chemical senses. And this chemical sensing produces what I call a molecular intimacy that is different than just the physical vibrational imprint of, as it were, the pixels that create an image in your brain.
So it's a direct interaction.
It's exactly that, at this primordial chemical level. And you also have to understand that our human brain is got three layers to it. It's got the right and left hemispheres on the top. As everybody knows, the right hemisphere is more artistic, it's spatial, it's creativity, it's dance, it's movement, and the left hemisphere is reason, logic, and linear thinking. And then right underneath the roof brain, as it were, is our limbic system. And that is our paleo-mammalian heritage from 70 million years ago, when mothers first started to care for their young. That defines the mammal. And beneath that, at the very core of the brain, is what is called the reptilian brain. And the reptilian brain is our heritage from 165 million years ago. It's like, back to the dinosaur kind of thing. My father was a ear, nose, and throat doctor, and he pointed out to me that another name for the reptilian brain is the rhyncephalon. And the rhyncephalon, from the word rhyn, it literally means the smell brain. But the smell, this is the most primordial use of smell. It's the smell of danger, and the smell of sex, and the smell of just survivor awareness. It's the most basic stuff in the reptilian brain. And then at the next brain up, in the limbic system, smell is correlated with emotion instead of just danger. And it's correlated with memory, so that you smell something you smelled before, and you get this memory comes into you. You have a girlfriend or a boyfriend who wore this scent, and as soon as you smell that scent, there's this associational recall immediately. Smell is the most reconstructive of all the senses. In other words, if you smell the perfume that your mom wore when you were a kid, it would bring back her touch, her feel, her voice, everything, because of this deep chemical link. It has this tremendously chemo-evocative nature to it.
I had that happen yesterday. I was in a store and some summer campers walked by, little kids, and they must have had on the suntan lotion. This isn't a natural smell, but chemical smell. The suntan lotion I used when I was little, and I inhaled that smell of, it must have been Coppertone or, oh my, I was back on the beach and I was about 8 years old.
Yeah, there is this instantaneous reactivation of the other sensorial inputs that would reconstruct the person or the experience. So it's very, very powerful for that.
Have essential oils been used with patients that have dementia, Alzheimer's? That seems like that might be a very helpful tool in not only calming them, but also maybe bringing back memory.
You're absolutely right. When I lived in England, I went to a conference on ways to ameliorate or to help with aging in Alzheimer's and dementia. And one of the things the overall concept there was to bring in as many sensorial inputs, not just fragrance, but, for example, if you bring back the music of your formative years, it's like when you're a teenager through your 20s, when you're dating and you're going through your educational experience, you get a tremendous input there. And there were people 80, 90 years old, and they found that if they brought back the music and the sense and the voice of people on the radio that were from their formative years, you got a real spike in memory.
So really the essential oils can be used therapeutically.
Oh, they can be used therapeutically. Now, that way we're just talking about their psychological emotive reconstruction. But then, The amazing thing about essential oils is that they affect the range in human beings from everything to the physical. They affect emotional well-being, and they affect also what we might call the spiritual domain. So you get this kind of across-the-board influence from the direct molecular action on the skin to their emotional recall, and then to their transcendent qualities of raising the human spirit. A lot of the transcendent element we see in the evolution of incense in ancient cultures. Incense was thought to be the direct communication between the world of the human and the realm of spirit/gods. Because when you burn something, the smoke would ascend upwards. And this was, in a sense, what we might call it the aromatic emails of early early civilizations. This idea of communication between humans and the divine. Then, if we look at what you said about the therapeutic or physical, let's look at that for a moment. These qualities of essential oils, many of them are anti-inflammatory, antispasmodic. They have things that are antimicrobial, and more specifically antiviral, antifungal, antibacterial. Then they also have wonderful qualities, a lot of them called cytophylactic. And that simply means that they have cellular regenerating capacity. In other words, that the essential oils can trigger the cellular metabolism to regenerate in the case where the skin is broken and you have a wound. And so these are miraculous qualities. And each plant has a set of different properties and that they will affect in different body parts that they can interact with and be therapeutic for. And usually there's two or three, maybe one or two, in which that particular plant excels in that particular thing. And then there's two or three others uses after that are not quite as strong, but they will affect that as well. So you can see the range of these things through the therapeutic aspect. Some of them will help with the healing of scar tissue. Antispasmodic thing is good for cramping. It's very, very good for burns. In fact, the origin of aromatherapy was by this Frenchman, René Gattefossé. He worked in a cosmetic lab in the south of France in the early part of the 20th century. And there was a fire broke out. And the story goes that instinctively his hand was burned, and he stuck it into the nearest liquid, and it happened to be lavender oil. And it completely took the pain away. That's another quality in essential oils called analgesic. It took the pain away, it reduced the scarring and the redness. Now the interesting thing is, he made it sound like this is some new discovery, but the women in particular, and men as well, but of the old ways who lived beyond normal civilization, you know, the women herbalists and healers and gardeners who knew plants, they knew of these properties since time immemorial. It's just that he made it sound like that all of a sudden the oil, this was the bridge to it being recognized, this one kind of happy accident, so to speak.
Wow. So really these are powerful tools that we can use in our lives to ease pain, to uplift our spirits, to get rid of or lessen inflammation.
And they're good for headaches. I mean, this is the range, what you just described for all this range of things really encompasses what I call self-empowered first aid. There's a whole range of things that before aromatherapy, one would normally go to the pharmacy and get get something off the shelf, or if one went to a doctor, one would get a prescription, but now there is this possibility of one having a basic knowledge of the healing properties of essential oils that one can apply on an everyday basis for things like cuts and burns and scrapes and infections. Of course, I'm not saying that you'd never go to a doctor. You should put going to a doctor together with what you can do for yourself.
Mm-hmm. And John, just so people who are listening know what we're talking about, we're not talking about synthetic or so-called natural fragrances here. We're talking about the actual real essential oil. Can you just describe briefly what the difference is between the real thing and those essential oils created in a lab?
Sure. It's interesting. When I first started buying essential oils, and when I began aromatherapy in London, this was back in the mid-1980s. When I began aromatherapy, the only book available at that time was Robert Tisserand's The Art of Aromatherapy, which I just read over and over and over because there was nothing else. You begin to learn that every plant that produces an oil was used herbally for millennia. And the difference of synthetic oils and natural oils is quite simply this. The first thing that I even want to say before I get into the difference, is that when I first started to buy oils, the French companies would say, well, do you want real lavender or do you want a nature identical oil? I honestly didn't know that much of the difference, except that when they said nature identical, it was so much cheaper. I said, and so it took me a while to tease out by asking people who knew more than I did that a nature identical oil is a fancy way of saying a synthetic. It's not identical. It's really a misnomer because a synthetic oil you get absolute repeatability from. You can manufacture something if you do accurate measurements and an accurate process of creating a synthetic. You can get it near perfect every time so that you get absolute repeatability. With a natural oil, that is a plant that is growing in nature and gets the four seasons and proper water, etc. With a natural oil, it is subject to seasonal variation. And seasonal variation means sometimes there's too much water, sometimes there's too little water, too much heat, too little heat. And this brings us really then to the larger question of this wonderful wine term called terroir. That's Terroir, and that's where we get our word like terra, like terra firma, like this is the earth. And terroir in the wine industry literally means the light, the water, the soil, the geology, the insects, the bugs, the quality of sunlight, the nature of the people who are tending the plants. It's the entire atmosphere into the earth and in the air that affects plant growth. And that is called the terroir. And the terroir literally means that you can have the same plant. For example, in the wine industry, you have let's say a Cabernet Sauvignon from the Loire Valley or something like that in France. And you take a cutting of it. And with this cutting, you grow the cutting in Chile, Argentina, Australia, California, the same cutting, but in different soils, different light, different water. And that same plant will give different wines in each of the countries. Sure, it will be recognizable, but there will be differences. So what it really, really means is that an essential oil is the product of the genetic qualities of the plant's DNA interacting with the terroir. And so that's the quality of a natural oil. It has this interaction with nature. A synthetic does not. Then furthermore, after that, you see that in a natural oil, let's take a look at like rose oil. Rose oil has anywhere from 250 to 300 different aromatic molecules in it. And for a really good synthetic representation of that oil, they might reproduce, maybe 30, 40, 50 of those 300 different aromatic molecules. And they get a quote-unquote decent rose representation. If you take a cheaper version, they might just do 6 to 10 different molecules of the rose. And they will get a very sweet, cloying, it will be rose, but it will not have, and this is the vital difference between natural and synthetic, they do not have what are called in gas liquid chromatography. That's when you take the oil and you subject it to finding out what we would just call the molecular fingerprint of the oil. If you make a graph and you get peaks and valleys, the peaks show the concentrations of different molecules. Some will be 40%, 50%, others will be 10, 20, 30. And at the very bottom of the graph, you will get things that are just tiny little blips, just like you'd hardly know, just a tiny little peak compared to something that is 40 or 50%. It just barely comes off the bottom of the graph. These little blips are called aromatic trace molecules. And the aromatic trace molecules, this is where the magic of the natural plant oil resides, is in these trace molecules. And the interesting thing, some of these trace molecules can be so small that they are literally measured in parts per million, parts per billion, and even touch on, with sensitive stuff, even perhaps at the level of parts per trillion. It's almost like homeopathic. And they have, here's the catch, not the catch, but the magic, that they have a disproportionate influence in both the healing attributes of the plant and the fragrance attributes of the plant that belie their tiny, tiny percentage. In other words, their influence is bigger than their physical presence. And so that's where the difference is, that these aromatic trace molecules do not exist in synthetics. And one of the great modern teachers in modern times, his name was Braja Mukherjee, and he was in research and development. He was from India, and he was employed by the biggest fragrance house in the world called International Flavors and Fragrance, IFF. And he really said that in a molecule, in a plant, when you do a GC, that's a gas chromatograph, that's getting this fingerprint, there are, and these are his words, there are galaxies within galaxies within galaxies of tiny aromatic trace molecules. It's endless. We don't even know all of them. And synthetics cannot and don't even attempt to put in these tiny trace molecules.
Again, it's almost like your whole systems theory. It's the isolating small elements or isolating parts of the plant is never as powerful as the whole package that nature created.
This is precisely it. And his student, Mukherjee's student, whose name is Ramakant, and I have had the good fortune of having him as my mentor, and I sent expeditions with him throughout the Himalayas of India and the tropics of India, looking at growing fields, plant research stations, flower markets, Ayurvedic hospitals, and ancient temples where flower offerings are made. And he got this transmission from Mukherjee about this galaxies within galaxies. And what Ramakant says further is that these aromatic trace molecules, this is where the soul of the plant lies, in this super subtle trace molecules, the bridge between matter and spirit. This is where the soul of the plant lies.
That's profound.
It is. It's made a huge influence in the way I look at things, that the tiniest can affect a much greater effect. And you don't get this in the synthetics. Speaking of synthetics, if you put under, the average man or woman on the street, I'm talking average, and you let them smell a synthetic rose and a real rose, the majority of them are going to be more attracted to the synthetic. And
why?
That is because it's been enculturated as this is what is real.
That's a sad statement.
Yeah, but it also is a platform for transformation. And if you look at it the other way and you say, we should take kids out into nature, into gardens, and say, smell this is a natural rose, now smell a man-made rose. And if this is part of education, in kind of what I would call a sensorial education, and you can do it with different senses, you really begin to show differences from the beginning. Synthetics tend to be more cloying, more sweet, more sticky than naturals. Now, I will also say there is an art in every medium. There's an art form. There are people who, in the really advanced level of making synthetics, can make some beautiful things. They truly can. I mean, as I say, I learned that there are art forms in every medium. And so I want to be careful to say that.
Mm-hmm, that makes sense, yes.
Yeah, because modern perfumes, the big sellers, are usually combinations of naturals and synthetics. That's what they are. And then you get this whole new movement in indie perfumery, which is the trend towards natural perfumes, and that means making only with botanical perfumery without synthetics. And then within that, you get another class of people who only want to use organics or wild-crafted or unsprayed oils. But there is a really burgeoning field of independent perfumery that is really beginning to take root. And one other thing I would just bring to your attention is, like, when you put a perfume on your skin is like analogous to the terroir of different places throughout the world, because a person's skin, a woman's skin in particular, is subject to, number one, her health, her mood, her diet, and for younger women, their moon time. So this alters the physiology and the blood chemistry, so that when you put a fragrance on, you know this, I'm sure, and your listeners will too. If you have 5 different women and they all try the same perfume, you are going to find it smells different on each person. And that's the terroir of the human skin. and it's called semiochemistry, and it means what the person brings to the table before the perfume is put on it. So in actual fact, what we would call the perfume experience, as opposed to the perfume, is the interaction of what's in the bottle with what is in the skin, and that reflects the whole blood chemistry.
So you're interacting with the scent.
That's exactly it. And one other thing I would say, that when I said the terroir is the atmosphere of a place, the atmosphere of a place is interesting. It literally means, when you look at the origins of the word, the atmosphere of the place literally means the vapors of the place. So it means what smells are emanating from that place because of the light, the water, the soil, the plant material. That's the atmosphere.
This is so fascinating.
Well, there are all these. Perfume and consciousness is really profound. In the ancient world, manifestations of, like in Egypt, for example, manifestations of the divine could come through visual domain, it could come through sound domain, and it could emanate through fragrance as well. A manifestation of the divine come through fragrance. And then you have this whole idea in church. It's called the odor of sanctity, that there are certain great beings, saints, even when they're buried, they emanate scent. And then further to that, there are living people who would emanate, but without intentionality. They would just emanate fragrance as a vibrational emanation of their spiritual state. It would just happen. The scent of violets, the scent of roses. And there's a term that has been given to this, which is very beautiful. It's called flowers in the blood.
I want that.
Well, then
I better start meditating.
This is the difference. You see, fragrance is something we put on the body, but if you put on, but if there's a difference, if you actually emanate from your soul quality and then the quality of your blood, and the spiritual domain is from the emanation of a change of spiritual state by some practice or some attribute of the soul.
So, John, this brings us to the sacred use of plants, which you've talked a bit about, but is there anything else you want to add about that?
Yeah, I mean, briefly, this even today in contemporary shamanic cultures, the shaman being the person who was at the pivotal interaction point between humans and between spirits and gods or God and the divine, and that the fragrance was always one of the most subtle means of communication and nourishment to the spiritual world. And for example, in Amazonian shamanism, there are actual practitioners who, for example, in the context of the ayahuasca, the visionary plant medicine, that are called perfumeros. And they actually have the capacity, while drinking this tea, which is a mixture of two Amazonian plants, they can both see auric breaks in a person's auric field, and at the same time, and the auric breaks, denote some kind of maladjustment or leak or invasion, some type of pathology of the human spirit. But at the same time, they can smell of what I would call a clairolfaction. They can actually smell the quality of the break, and it comes out, a bad spirit smells fetid. It stinks. And so that what they do is they sprinkle the patient with aromatic oils. They rub them with aromatic plants. They give them aromatic baths. Particularly, they do this in Brazil to restore not merely the body, but the aura, the energetic spiritual envelope around the body, to restore the integrity of that. And that's what the perfumeros do.
I love that. And I think I read in one of your articles, you do have an article about this.
Yes.
That's very interesting, about copal and different scents are very highly valued
Yes.
with these healers.
Yes, exactly. All of these scents, black copal is used in Peru. It's also used by the Maya. They'll also use white copal. All of these fragrances are said to be vehicles of nurturing and communicating with the spiritual world, of getting the unseen helpers, the fairy world, so to speak, the elemental world, what in India is called the devas, the mothers of the plants, that elemental help to the healer to make the healing. So that's the way that works, is being able to have that subtle level of communication. And fragrance is almost like a payment. In fact, in Venezuela, these Indians called the Warao Indians, the shaman smokes a cigar to communicate with the spirits. And in this cigar is used this herb. It's called caranya. Caranya it's in the myrrh family. And they put these little crystals, it's a resin. They put it, it's Proteum hetephilium. They put it in with the tobacco. And this is the most prized smoke of all when they smoke these cigars. It's got these little aromatic crystals in this wild tobacco. And that is the most prized thing by the spirits and by the shaman. You'll find this everywhere, this kind of aromatic communion with the divine.
And this really, I could see how your work as an archaeologist and aromatherapist really connects in this way.
Yeah, archaeology, anthropology, and aroma, all fuse into this. And what what the attempt is, whenever I talk about these in workshops or whatever, is to how can you bring some of this ancient wisdom, some of this knowledge, how can you bring it into a contemporary form so that people can use it and put their own spin on it, their own interpretation, and still use some of the traditional ways to augment their healing. I have a lot of people who are energetic healers, subtle vibrational healers, people who do Reiki or things of that nature, people even who do hypnotherapy, that you can utilize fragrance as a subtle, energetic tool, as an agent for change.
So, John, you've been working with the oils for many years, many decades, I believe. Have you noticed, has your life changed a lot since you're immersed with them? You're working with the people that grow the plants, that make the oils. How has this affected your life?
I'm really fortunate, and I say this, that I really love what I do. And I feel really blessed in that. I have a passion for it, and I love it. And if you take a word like the word amateur, the way that we use the word amateur today is in contrast to professional. But the original meaning of the word amateur, it comes from the word amore. In other words, it means somebody who does something for the love of it. And that is very different. The professional is maybe very good at what they do, but there may not be an emotional, spiritual investment in it. And this is where you begin to get the difference between technical expertise and soul. And so, it's changed me completely and utterly. into having a passion for not only for what I have learned from the plants, but everybody who gets something from me or in teaching, I really try to communicate to people the potentiality for the aromatic wisdom to enter in its own form into their life and to make some transformational change. I mean, you came to that workshop that I did called Dharma Flora, which was really the use of fragrance in Eastern meditational teachings. And I think that even in that workshop, we just dealt with the spiritual there and the meditative use of fragrance. I think all of that, it gives you a lens in which to not only receive teachings, and this is the key word, but to in turn transmit them. You not only receive and enrich yourself. I think part of the floral universe is that you receive and then you transmit. That's what fragrance is. It's a transmission not only of aesthetic beauty, but it's a transmission of, and this is the key word, wordless telepathic wisdom. And you want to receive and you want to transmit. And you want those people to who you transmit to, in turn, to somewhere in their life to receive and transmit. And I think that's the most beautiful thing that can come out of this paradigm.
Wow. Well, yes, my experience in your class was very, I'm a very grounded person, but I'm also open. And I had an experience in your class. We drank a hydrosol.
Yes.
And a hydrodistillation. Was it champaka? Was that the one?
Yes, it was golden champaka from India.
And I sat there and we drank it like a little elixir in beautiful glasses. And I felt literally like, it was almost like, because I'm a meditator, it was like I had been meditating for half an hour or 45 minutes where my physical boundaries dissolved and I felt myself uplifted and joyful, almost like a camera lens opening up or a flower opening up. And I heard or felt, or I call it almost an impression because it's hard to describe. The message was, you can have the garden anywhere you are.
Exactly.
It's inside you. And I think you described it, I think I took notes during the class and you said it's almost like a floral buzz. And and it definitely was.
It is.
It was.
That is the interaction of those aromatic trace molecules with your own molecules, and that is what we would call a molecular handshake between species. And I think that there is this extraordinary potential for floral communion or plant communion, and what you experienced, and each plant will have different messages to impart. It's really singular to each plant, but the hydrosol is interesting. The hydrosol is the water-soluble aromatic components of the plant. Like you get rose oil and you get rose water. And my Ramakant, my teacher in India, says that the soul of the plant, it comes out in the oil, but it even comes out, in some cases, even more in the water. And so when you drink it, it's quite profound. And then you can couple it. You can anoint and drink at the same time. So it's useful in meditation, and it's useful in a creative process, not only for producing things, but just like you said with your garden, that your garden is inside and you can produce it outside. You get these kind of transmissions from drinking the hydrosol that are singularly unique. I mean, I've drunk the hydrosol and it's given me, I just sit and write notes sometimes. And you can drink the hydrosol with in a group like we did, or you can drink it with one other person, and then it reduces auric boundaries between people. It makes communication deeper and more fluid. So the hydrosol is like another aspect of the aromatic paradigm of healing and evolution. I mean, that's, I think, what the plants are always trying to teach is different forms of an evolutionary paradigm.
I know in one quote of yours that I wrote down, you said the nose can be a path. You spoke of the nose as a path of awakening, which I thought was
Absolutely,
really great.
absolutely. It is, because the truth is that the deep sense of smell is intuition. It's just that simple. It's intuition. It's like the direct knowledge without words. First you get that wordless impression of truth, and then you begin to language it into words. But first it comes to you as just a transmission of a clairsentient impression, and then you begin to language it. But first it's the feeling. And I think I've said before that in French, the verb to, I said it in the class, the verb in French, which is very telling, to feel is sentir, sentir, and the identical verb to smell is sentir. There's no accent difference. There's no it is precisely the same word. So it tells us that there is this deep and profound correlation between smelling and feeling, and that's what happens in the limbic system of the brain. Is there is emotion and scent and memory is all there.
So, John, in closing, I'd love for you to share with listeners one of your favorite oils.
Well, if I just, I choose the most known oil, perhaps one of the most known oils. I could choose profound oils like I've talked a lot about the blue lotus or the blue water lily. But if I choose something that's available to anybody, it's simply lavender. And lavender, let's just start with the name. Lavender, it comes from the French lavande, which means to wash or to clean. And that's why, incidentally, in Spanish, a laundromat is called a lavanderia. And so it cleans, it washes. So what are some of the properties of lavender? Okay, it has so many properties. I actually refer to lavender as the Swiss Army knife of aromatic oils. And anybody who knows the Swiss Army knife knows that it's known because it has, in one knife, you have a multiplicity of blades. You have you have so many blades that have many, many uses. And the same thing in the lavender. It has these properties. It's analgesic, that is, it reduces pain. It is antispasmodic. I can tell you, on long drives, when I drive up 5 from L.A. to San Francisco, sometimes on long drives, I will occasionally get a cramp in my calf and of my leg. And I keep the lavender in the console next to the driver's seat. If I feel a cramp coming, I just take 4 or 5 drops and rub it on my calf really well, and I will get relief from that cramp even while driving. It's also anti-inflammatory. It's good for burns. It's good for cuts. And in cuts, it has the property that we would call cytophylactic, that is cellular regenerating. So if you get something like a paper cut, with those real annoying little fine cuts, you take the lavender and you just apply a couple drops a couple times a day, and it will heal up. It will trigger the metabolism to more quickly heal the break in the skin to actually grow. It's good for headaches. Take 3 or 4 drops and put them on the forehead and the temples and the back of the neck, and you rub it in even into the scalp, and it will get rid of 90% of headaches because it's antispasmodic. If it's due to muscles, it's due to the analgesic quality. And then after you put it on the forehead and the temples, take some and put it right under the nose too, so you really get the smell of it. It's good for insect bites. Like I was actually in the Amazon and got a bee sting, and I immediately put the lavender on it and just kept applying it, and it tremendously reduced the pain. It's good. It has allegedly antitoxic qualities for painful ant bites or perhaps spider bites. It's good in massage for relaxing people. It's anti-stress. It's good for just giving that quality of serenity. It's good for little babies that are intensively crying all the time. If you take a drop and put it in the crib, or a single drop on a collar of their clothing, that's all you need is a single drop. That will really help in reducing agitation. It just has all of these different uses. This is really an oil that I actually carry in my pocket, in my jeans, wherever I go. I mean, this I carry with me. It's just like a little toolkit that I can do so many things with. I said just the stress quality, I put it on my pillow before I go to sleep. That you can use it in the bath. For a very relaxing bath, it's good when your feet are really tired after standing a lot. You massage lavender with a little bit of, any vegetable carrier oil. So it's a tremendous all-around general purpose oil.
I can see why you call it the Swiss Army knife, except it's purple. It's a cute purple Swiss.
Except it's purple. You're absolutely right.
Oh, I love that. I love lavender, but I think that's a great idea to carry some around just in case.
Oh, it's and another thing it's useful for is fainting. If somebody faints, you take a tissue like a Kleenex and put 6, 7, 8 drops on it and put it under the nose. And it is equally good along with peppermint for nausea. It's really good for nausea. So, I mean, look at the range of things that one thing does, from psychological to physical.
Wow, lavender, a new appreciation for lavender.
Good.
This has just been a mind-opening interview. I really thank you so much for your time and your knowledge and sharing this knowledge with us. Is there anything else you would want to say to listeners around the world?
Again, I emphasize that the use of these plants and the oils ranges from the physical to the metaphysical. And it can actually, besides everything I've talked about, it can influence thought processes. And what I mean by that is there's a term called dendritic, which dendritic means the way that a tree branches. First, there's the trunk, and then there's the first big branch that comes out, and then it branches into the next little branch, and the next little branch, and the next little branch. And I've kind of incorporated that as a metaphor for the way of floral thinking, that it actually is very, very fluid, but in a dendritic way, that it can bring you to a fork where you can begin to see possibility A and possibility B almost at the same time. And sometimes I get so excited, I say, I've got to remember, if I go down route A, I've got to remember what B was and come back to it, because it enriches this kind of what I would call botanical dendritic way of thinking, that you begin to see the possibilities of branching thinking. Let's just put it like that. So you just don't think linearly. So you begin to see connections between things in kind of an organic fashion. And when you see these connections, and let's say you go down Avenue A, then you begin to incorporate what in Buddhism is called mindfulness, so that after you've exhausted that potentiality, you can return to the point of branching. You can remember to return to it. That's mindfulness, and then begin to explore Avenue B.
So you're thinking almost how nature thinks.
Yeah,
It's
it's just what I call branching thinking, that you get so enthusiastic by the interaction between plants. And I think that's what plant wisdom is, that they really, that there is a tremendous possibility between what I would call co-evolution between plants and humans. I mean, the fact that plants can give us food, medicine, clothing, visionary experience,
shelter,
fragrance, that there is extraordinary, and to say nothing of oxygen, that the Amazon, for example, I've always looked at as the lungs of a continent. And the fact that we should be destroying ecosystems. When you fly over the Amazon, you see vast bare patches now. And these are like cattle ranches and other monocrops that are put in there. When you destroy the diversity, you get into this monocultures, and it's good for the short run, but what plants teach us is the long-range evolutionary thinking, not just short-term financial gain. And this is one of the problems that we are in, is this short-term thinking. Plants teach us to think in long-term growth. And one other thing I might add is, as we destroy ecosystems for housing or for monocrops or whatever, we begin to destroy the possibilities of pollinators. Like bees now, in particular, are endangered through cell wave towers or microviruses or mites, whatever you want to call it. That as a pollinator drops out of the ecosystem, you really are in trouble. I mean, Einstein said something that if we lose bees in a short amount of time, we will have a drastic reduction of quality of life. We will, right? Food qualities and medicine, what have you. Bees are what we call keystone species. That if you lose this, and we are losing them, we definitely get into trouble. And the anecdote for some of these systemic problems is not just botanical knowledge, but is to teach at the earliest levels of education with kids holistic general systems thinking, that everything is connected. That is the key, that if you teach this ecological thought process, this dendritic thought process, you're going to have less putting bad chemicals into the system, less fracking, less putting into dumping of potential chemicals. We think too short term. So everything is based on a systems model, an ecological model of thinking. But the earlier you teach into children these models, then you don't have to wait until the crisis occurs, and you can engineer them into the synergetic thinking rather than dealing with the destructive results of non-synergetic thinking.
And not just reacting to what's happening.
Exactly. But it's taken a long time till you get these negative things in the universe, in the planet. So why not teach them at the beginning? This was the ancient way of thought. You taught the ecological way at the earliest models.
We wouldn't be where we are today.
And just in closing again, I see the value of all the digital universe, but if the digital universe does not interact with the botanical and biological in terms of preservation, we have a problem.
Well, John Steele, if people want to get a hold of you or order some of your oils and know that they're getting the real deal, the real essential oils, how can they find you? What's your email address?
Okay, so the email address is info@lifetreearomatics.com, and if you do it that way, then I can respond to you. I do not have a website, almost deliberately, because I'm just not into just mass product selling. I really believe in small-scale, handcrafted, not only the oils, but in the capacity as much as possible to take time with the people I deal with. So it's kind of a paradox. You want to spread the word, but at the same time, I'm not into just everybody being a number.
Mass production.
Yeah.
Well, let me say that again. It's info@Lifetree Aromatix, aromatix.com.
The only thing that I can really send by email is a price list. So if people, begin their inquiry with, please send me a price list, we can start the dialogue out that way.
That is fantastic. John Steele, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, knowledge of the plants, and your very, for me, mind-altering way of thinking. It's been really a pleasure to speak with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to a Sustainable World Radio podcast. For more information or to hear our other podcasts or interviews, visit www.sustainableworldradio.com. Sustainable World Radio is produced by Jill Cloutier. Music by Dana Lyons. Thanks for listening.